So hello everyone, another stream today. Today we're gonna build a custom application in Webflow.
That's effing sweet.
I want to build something from scratch with you guys. Okay, I have a couple suggestions. My suggestion is that we can create something with a public API. There is a repository called public APIs, and we can find APIs for all different types of stuff. For animals, for businesses, for stocks, whatever, you know. Um, I've been, for example, I found an API for Pokemons. I think it's cool that you can just grab data from different Pokemons, but that would be just the start of it. Okay, one thing is the type of data that we're gonna deal with, and we can do it with the Pokemons. I think it could be cool. It could be fun. But once we've selected the type of data that we want to interact with, then we can start adding more and more features. The first one, obviously, is just grabbing the data and showing it in Webflow. That's the basic thing, and today we're going to do that. And then maybe we could start thinking about other features like, hey, what about we create a favoriting system for the Pokemons or whatever data we're showing? Okay, I want to mark the Pokemons that are favorite for me, and when I load the page, I want to see them. Or maybe we can create some filters, or maybe we can create we can add a way of creating new Pokemons, like my own personal Pokemons that I made up, and we can add them too. Or maybe we can create a game where we try to catch a Pokemon, or where we try to, I don't know, make a market transaction. I don't know. Okay, so Pokemon. I think everyone finds Pokemon cool. It's just a free API that we can use to fetch data from Pokemons. And let me show you a bunch of examples. We can just have a list of Pokemons, and we can decide the amount of Pokemons that we want to have. So maybe we can just load 2 of them, or we can load 10 of them. This is just using query parameters, which is cool. The next thing is that we can also get data. We can also get data from a specific Pokemon. We can get the abilities. We can get game indices. Okay, so it returns the index for a specific game. That's really specific. The items that it holds, the moves that it has. Okay, so we definitely can create a game with this. Cool. So what about, let's just make a quick draft. I'm thinking, and by the way, I'm gonna improvise all of this. So be ready to watch me break something and try to debug stuff. But still, I think it's fun to see. Just the only thing that I think would be great is to just keep it as a mobile version. Okay, like I just did when I created this app. Instead of having to worry about, all the Webflow designs, make it responsive, stuff like that, that's up to the Webflow designers. That's for other streams. In here, we don't make things pretty. In here, we just make things work, and that's it. So I'm just gonna, make it like it was mobile view. So it's gonna simplify many different things. Cool. So then I think that we're ready to start. Maybe we could draft something first. Let's imagine that this is a phone screen. So for now, we could just do something like Pokemons. Let's start with something very basic that is just listing the Pokemons, right? I think that we don't even need to sketch anything. We can just do it here. I'll just create it. Oh, I already created a new copy of Climb First. Although I can't guarantee that I'm going to use full Climb First specs. So full Climb First conventions. So if I mess up with something, please be aware that I don't usually build Webflow sites. I just code for them, but I almost never build anything. But we can start by, let me just get rid of all this demo stuff. I'll just preserve the main wrapper. Yeah, let's keep this. And as I mentioned, I just want to have a mobile view. And the mobile view, it's from 478 pixels and down. So we'll just make this 478 pixels, and let's make it RAMs. No, actually, I think that we have to make it pixels to support to fully support any kind of mobile with any kind of settings. We'll make it pixels. Okay, we'll center this, and we'll have a full height. Whoops. Should I? No, I think it's fine. Okay. No, I think it's fine. We can just leave it with the content to that to the page. Okay, and in here, let's start with a section where we list the Pokemons. You know, let's start really simple. So we can start with Pokemon's list component. Let's call it like that. And in here, yeah, we'll just need a Pokemon item. So let's create Pokemon item component too. And this Pokemon item, what can we show from a Pokemon? Let's go ahead and check it again. From a Pokemon, we can show, let me zoom in. We can show the name. We can show the ID maybe. We can show the height. And probably a picture. Do we have a picture? Isn't there going to be a picture? Because I think I would love to have a picture. Oh, yeah, sprites. Let me see. Sprites. Okay, this one's pretty ugly. Back shiny, front default, front shiny, Dreamwear. I'm just going to check a bunch of sprites. Oh, this one is cool. The SVG. Okay, we're going to grab the SVG. Great. So let's start by just showing, how about we show the SVG, the picture, and also we show the ID, which I'm going to hope that it's the Pokedex ID, and also the name. Okay, so then let's just make an image, and we'll call this Pokemon item image. And we can make this image, I don't know, 8 RAM per 8 RAM. Too big for RAM, 4x4, something like that. Yeah, for example. I think that we should make this flex. Let's make this flex horizontal. Let's put some gap in it, 2 RAMs, for example. And in here, we could have a div with a text block inside, with 2 text blocks actually, one for the ID. So this would be, let's just make it like this so we can identify what we want to use. The ID and the name. Like that. Or we can just make something random like this ID, and let's use the Dido one. Okay, cool. Let's add some padding. Now that I'm not doing this the way that people would love to, but I'm just making it quick so I don't have you guys waiting until we have something to show. Let's just put a title, and we'll say Pokemon's Skull. Okay, some margin. Hey, I think I'm not doing it that wrong, right? Margin, huge, large, small. Making this right? I think so. Margin. Let's make it medium. Okay, cool. So then now we have the template. Really rough template, but I think it's more than enough. Where we have a list, right, which would be the Pokemon's list component, and also we've created a Pokemon item component. And what we want to do is just grab a bunch of Pokemons, and then we can display them by using this template. Let me just, how about we make this a little bit Pokemon item ID, and maybe we can just trying to, let's make it accessible, something like that. And then the name, we can make it bigger, maybe. Pokemon item name. And how about we make this 1.5, something like that. Nah, 25, for example. Cool. You ready, guys? Because now it's a time where we start coding, actually. So let me publish this, and I'm gonna do everything from scratch. I'm gonna grab a new fresh copy of the developer starter template, and I'm gonna make all the connections to start rendering stuff. Let's go. Yeah, that's it. Cool. So the first thing is I'm gonna create, as I mentioned, a new fresh copy of the developer starter template. If you don't know what this is, it's the template that we use for almost all the projects that we have in Finsweet. And I think it's a really, it really helps me work faster in Webflow because it has a bunch of utilities that really help a lot. So let me just show you how you can use it. I'm just gonna use this template and I will create a new repository because I wanna have it. And I'll just do it in my own personal account. So I'll create stream Pokemon's app, for example. Let's create this. I'll make it public in case you want to check it. Okay. Once the repo is generated, I'll move that. I'll open that in my personal VS Code in my computer using VS Code, and we'll start coding. So this is ready code. I'll open it with GitHub Desktop because I use GitHub Desktop, and I'll just grab. Let me zoom in so you understand what I'm doing. I'll just clone this to this folder. Cool. Fine. So fresh copy, and we can open it. Open in Visual Studio Code. Okay. And here we are. Fresh copy. Okay, good. So the first thing that we have to do when creating a copy of the developer starter is read the documentation. And if you haven't, if it's the first time that you're watching me do this, please don't try to just use it. Read the documentation. Okay, there's a big README with a lot of information that it's gonna help you set it up. But if you already know the drill, I'll just do pm install, which will install all the dependencies. And now that we have this, I think that we can just use the demo code for a second. So let me now do pm dev. We're ready. So now that I've run the development server, I have here a suggestion of a script. So let's grab it, and I'll go to Webflow, and let's put it in the homepage script here, publish. And now if everything went smoothly, we should see how in the console we get a console log saying, hello, John Doe. Great. Okay. So this console log that you can see here, hello, John Doe, this site was last published on March 17th. It happens because we have the placeholder code and we have live reload. Let me just check. Yep, anytime that I save, the page is reloaded. So now we are good to go. Great. Okay. We need the item, obviously, right? Because this item in here is going to act as the template. So let's just do it. Let's define this. It doesn't matter how you call your attributes. If you have your own convention, that's fine. If you want to use the Finsweet convention, that's also fine. But it's definitely 100% up to you, okay? Because I want to be as not opinionated, I'll just use data attributes, okay? So let's call data element. And this would be Pokemon item, for example. Cool. So I have Pokemon item, but inside the item, we also have to define a bunch of stuff, right? We want to populate the image, we want to populate the ID, and we also want to populate the name. So we have to identify the three of them. Let's grab the image. Let's say the element, and we can just call this Pokemon image, for example. And we'll also say data element equals to Pokemon ID. And the last one is going to be data element equals to Pokemon name. So now we have all the elements identified. Maybe we could identify also the list, right? Because the list would be, I need to interact with the list to know where I have to put the elements. But I think that there's a better way to do it, and we don't need to identify it right away. I'll show you in a second. So we have the selectors in place. Let's publish this, and now we can start just interacting with them. The reason why Webflow does this, of first having to create an array and then pushing into it, it's because, and we also do that in attributes. It's a really smart way of being able to call this before that Webflow.js has initialized. Because if Webflow.js has initialized, it means that window.webflow, it's already there. But if the Webflow library has still not initialized, then we're creating an array and we're adding the callback into it. So we're saying, hey, when Webflow is ready, just run this function. And this means that any code that we write inside here, it's just gonna run until after Webflow has finished loading, which means that all the elements on the page have fully loaded, and also means that any component from Webflow, like sliders, tabs, forms, etc., it's also initialized. If we didn't care about the Webflow components, we could definitely not use window.webflow, when we could just use document.addEventListener, down content loaded, like this, okay? But just for the sake of staying persistent, we'll just use the window.webflow, okay? So first of all, we have to interact with the elements, right? We want to grab this template element, and then we can just populate it. So let's start with that. Let's query the element, the item template. One thing that I recommend you guys, and anytime that you're coding, is try to be as descriptive as possible when writing your code, because it's not about you understanding what you're doing. It's about the future you also understanding what you're doing, and it's about the other teammates that you read your code to understand what you're doing. So one recommendation is try to always be as clear as possible when naming stuff. Instead of calling this L, for example, which is really used, we can just be clear and say, okay, I want to graph the item template. Okay, and this item template, it's going to be in the document, and we'll do query selector, where we're basically saying query something from the document, being the document, the current page. Okay, and in here we can add the selector like this. Data element, it was Pokemon item. Okay, so anything that goes inside a query selector, okay, it can be, it's expecting a CSS valid selector. Okay, when you're writing CSS, if you target classes, you write the CSS using a dot, right? If you use an attribute, you write the CSS using a hash. If you write an ID. If you write an attribute, you write the CSS using brackets. Okay, this is the same as if I just took some CSS file and I started adding some CSS properties to it. Okay, so always be aware that in query selector, we can do any kind of CSS selector. For example, this is not limited to just doing it like that. Did you know that attributes have specific selectors that you can have? We're not going to use this today, but I think it's something cool to know that attributes can be targeted not only between brackets, but also they have a bunch of prefixes that are really powerful. Okay, can you see this prefix here, or this prefix here, or this prefix here? This is because it's CSS and we can use it in JavaScript. And these prefixes are just saying, okay, when it's appended with this prefix, it means that an attribute, it's white space separated list of words. Or when it's this, it means that the attribute starts with a specific value, right? So we have quite a lot of control to query stuff if you understand that anything in a query selector is actually a valid CSS selector, okay? So that's another thing that you know now. Hopefully you learned something new. Cool. And also the next thing is, because I'm using TypeScript, now that I'm interacting with this element, um, um, out of the box, TypeScript just knows that it's an element, but it's not only an element, it's more than that. Okay, and I think that that's the next thing that I would like to show you. Let's imagine, for example, that I want to set the item template styles. Okay, one thing that you can do in JavaScript is you can grab an element and then you have a property called style in it. And in this property style, you can basically update any styles from the element. Like you can have whatever. Okay, but see what I'm having here. I'm having an error saying that property style is not part of element. Okay, the reason why this is happening is because we're not interacting with the proper interface. So let's try to understand why this is an HTML element and not just an element. Okay, so HTML element. Okay, now that I have to find this as an HTML element, well, obviously TypeScript is going to warn me that maybe this is not present. So I'll just say that if there is no item template, we'll just return the function just in case that the element didn't exist on the page. Okay, but now that I have the item template, I can access the style property and I can see everything that it's available inside the style property. But if I change this to element, look what's happening now. I can't access the style property. One thing that really opened my mind when I was trying to understand how JavaScript works and how JavaScript understands the elements on the browser was to see the interfaces tree. Let me show you. If you check for the description of an HTML element in the Mozilla docs, I think it's the best documentation site that you can check. See how this is an interface, and this interface, it's inheriting other interfaces. Okay, the way that the browsers treat elements, it's basically by defining an interface, and they start by the simplest one, which is an event target. An event target could be anything. It could be, let me just show you. It could be the HTML tag. It could be the head tag. It could be style tag, meta tag. It could be the body. It could be an SVG. It could be anything. That's the interface that let's say it's like the parent of everything. Okay. Then the next thing that it's more specific is, okay, we have the biggest interface, but then we can have something that is more specific, right? And it's a node. Okay. A node could be, sorry, I forgot to say that not only the HTML, but it could also be the window, for example. When you're saying window, the window, it's the entire browser, that's still an event target. But then when you move down to a node, it's essentially any line that it's in the tree. Could be a comment, could be a tag, could be a text block, anything that you see here that it's just a one line of something, it's a node. Okay, but obviously a comment cannot have the same functionalities as a div, for example, right? Because a div, you can style the div, but you cannot style a comment. So it makes sense that all of them, they are nodes, but then we can keep drilling down, and we can now say, okay, but what's an element, right? An element is something that it's more specific, meaning that, for example, a comment, it's a node, but it's not an element, right? Because it's not something that you see on the page that you can interact with. An element could be anything that you see on the page. So the HTML, it's not an element. The head, it's not an element. The style tag, it's not an element. A div, it's an element, for example. An SVG is an element. An image is an element, right? So now we are nesting even more. Now the HTML element, it's an element that it's not an SVG, basically. Because an element is essentially either an HTML element or an SVG element, because browsers treat SVGs differently than the rest of the elements. Okay, so it's not an SVG. So now this means that it's an HTML element, and we can even drill more down and say, Let me just show you in a second. Right now, this is a div. So I could even say that not only this is an HTML element, it's an HTML div element. Let me just show you. HTML div element. Okay? Because the browser has a specific interface for each of the elements on the page. An HTML div element, it's an HTML element, which is an element, which is a node, which is an event target. Okay? So we can even be more specific and say that this is an HTML div element. But you know what? I'm now thinking that maybe it would make sense to have this. So many elements, yes. It's like a tree that keeps drilling down with all the different interfaces. Like the more specific something is, the more inheritance it has from the top parents. It just the moment that you understand this, it really helps me. So having this map in your mind, it really helps understanding how browsers treat the elements. And actually, now I'm thinking, at some point we will want to have this element clickable. So I'll just convert this to a div block, and I'll just make this not underlined, no decoration. And why? I don't want to have decoration. Oh, it's probably because of the styles of the climb first. Okay, so let's just leave it like that. And now that I've converted this to a link tag, now this means that this is not an HTML div element, this is an HTML anchor element. And the reason why it's cool to define this as an anchor element is because the moment that we want to do something like, item template dot href, we know that it has the property of href because we've told TypeScript that it's an anchor element. And we could go to the documentation if we wanted to know exactly everything that can be done with a link. I'm not going to do that now, but just be aware that you can check, okay, what's specific to just links to the A tag? So we have HTML anchor element download, for example. This is just specific to anchor tags. Hash, host name, href, all of these options are just specific to links. So anchor tags. So the more you know. Cool. And I think that we should start already doing something, right, with this, because I think I'll talk it too much when I'm not doing anything. So let's just start with the actual coding. Okay, we have the template, the item template. The first thing that we want to do is we want to remove that template. Okay. So let me tell you why. Let's just make up a bunch of Pokemons for now. Let's just put it in here. Instead of fetching them today, I'm just going to go and do something different. I'll just hardcode them so I can explain things faster. So I'm creating an array, and let me just grab the data that we wanted, which was ID, name, and what else did we want? And a picture. And the picture is essentially sprites, other dream world, I think it was. I think so. So we'll just do, let's create one, and we'll say ID1, just because. And we'll say name equals to ditto. And the next one, it's going to be sprites. Oops, I messed up here. Sprites, and this was an object. Let me just copy it. Sprites, other dream world. So other dream world is underscore. Yeah, underscore. The dream world. And in here, front default, and I'll just copy this. Like that. Okay, so we have one ditto. And let me just do the same, but I'll call this, I don't know, Pikachu. Like that. And for now, I'll just use the same picture, okay? Don't hate me. And another one, Bulbasaur. Like this. Did I write it correctly? I think so. Okay, so now we have the Pokemon's data. We want to just replicate each one of the Pokemons with the template. So we want to grab this template and just replicate it, okay? So let's do it, and then I'll tell you how we can improve some stuff. So the first thing that we want to do is loop through all the Pokemons to create a new item, right? So we'll just say for, you know what? I'm gonna do a map. I'm just gonna say Pokemon items, okay? And I'll just take the Pokemon. Let me just rename this to something like Pokemon's data. As I said before, let's try to be as clear as possible when writing stuff. And we're gonna map this, okay? Mapping is essentially an array method where we are gonna go through each of the items. So we're gonna go on the first item, second item, and the third item. And from that method, we're gonna return a result of that item, which means that when we go through the first item, then we can return something. And when we go through the second item, we can also return something. And the return values are going to be stored in a new array. So we'll essentially end up with a new array that contains the items that we want to append to the list. So I'll just grab this. Let's do some destructuring, ID, name, and sprites. Okay. So the first thing that we have to do is we have a template here. What we can do is we can create a clone of the template. So let's just say const item, and we'll clone the item. So as item template, clone node, and true. Clone node, it's essentially just saying, okay, grab these element, clone it, and the true, it means that not only clone the element, but also clone all the children of the element, okay? Instead of just the outermost parent. But now we have a problem here, and it's that the clone node method is a little bit stupid, and it doesn't know that I'm cloning an anchor element, and now it's thinking that the cloned element it's a node instead of being an anchor element. So one convenient thing that we have in TS-utils a method that's called clone node, and I can have item template, and it's essentially just doing the same, but it's returning me the proper type. So now the item knows that it's an anchor element because we've cloned the item template that also was an anchor element. Okay, that's the only difference. But the code that it's for in this function, it's essentially the same. Okay, we have the new item. It's a clone. So what we have to do is we have to query the elements inside, which means the image, the ID, and the name elements. Okay, so we can just do the same as we did here. We can have the image element, and we'll say item query selector. Notice how I'm doing item and not document, because now we are looking inside this item, not inside the entire page. We just want to query the elements that are children of the clone that we just created. Okay, so we'll create selector, and let me just copy this and paste it here. And this is going to be Pokemon image, like this. I'll just move on and say ID element, and it's query selector. And I'll just again copy this and paste it here. Data element, Pokemon ID. And I'll do the same for the name. I have the three of them. HTML image element. Great. So this is an image. So now TypeScript is going to know that we are dealing with an image. The ID, it's a text block. And a text block is essentially a div. So we'll just define this as a div element. And also the name, it's a text block, so we'll do the same. Okay, so now we've defined everything properly. Cool. So now we have to populate this. And I'm just going to say, if there's an image element, notice how I'm always checking if an element exists, because it could be that somebody who has access to the project comes in and decides to delete something. We don't want to break the whole application, right, if this happens. So instead, we'll just make sure that the elements are there. So if there's an image element, and we'll grab the image element, and we'll update the source of the element, which is just available because thanks to Glenn, we defined it as an image element. okay? And we'll define this as the sprites.other.dreamworld.front_default, like this. Remember that I just cloned the same structure from the API. Okay, so this for the element, the image element, and this for the ID element. We'll say ID element text content, because now we want to update the text of it. So text content is going to be the ID. Oh, it's a number. So look what is happening here. I'm getting an error, and this is because text content expects a string, but ID, it's a number. So we can do a bunch of stuff. We can do ID to string to convert it to a string, or we can just do a template literal like this, where we just create a string and inject ID inside it, or we could do string ID, which is converting a value to a string. We could do it in multiple ways. I think I'll just do ID to string. And don't ask me why. It just, yeah, I don't have any preferences. It just because. And let me just do the same for the name. Name element. And this is going to be the name. Okay. So now we cloned the item. We created all the elements inside the item. We populated them. And the last thing that we have to do is just return this item. Okay. So if I do this, now we have a Pokemon items ID, array that contains a bunch of anchor tags. And let me show you what's happening. Let's console log this, Pokemon items. Like this. Let's just recap. I've grabbed the template, I've looked through all the Pokemon's data, and from each of the entries of the Pokemon's data, I've created a new item and put it in an array. Okay, this is how map works. Anything that we return, it's put in the array. So we have an array with HTML anchor elements. So we console log this, oops, and we check it. See how we have an array of items, okay? But these items are actually not on the page. So these items are not here yet, but still we can interact with them. So I can expand them and I can see everything, okay? But, you know, if I try to focus them, it's just telling me the node cannot be found in the current page, you know? But we still can do anything with them. We can update the contents of them. We can query them. We can just keep them in memory. Imagine that I don't want to append them now. Maybe I want to append them only if the user does something, you know? I still have these elements in memory and I can access them at any time, okay? And the reason why we can do this, it's because of the meaning of DOM. Essentially, the DOM is a representation of the page as objects, okay? An element from the page, any element when I query, when I do a query selector, when I access that element somehow, I'm getting a object that represents that element. Okay, this is the same as I just did this. Because element and the element that it has an access key, an area atomic, it has a so it could have an ID, it could have a class name, and you know, it's essentially just an object, right? And an object, it's a variable. We can have that object anywhere. We can store it in a variable and access it at any time, okay? So this brings me to the fact that it doesn't matter if this template that I just have here, and it's pretty ugly, right? I don't want to see this template. When I query the template, before I do anything else with it, I can just remove it. Remove. Okay? This is essentially saying remove it from the page, but this doesn't mean that we're actually destroying the element. We still have a reference pointing to the object that represents the element in the DOM. Okay, so this means that when we clone the node in here, item template, it doesn't matter that the element is no longer on the page. We still have a reference, so we still can clone it, so we still can generate a new item, and we can interact with everything in memory without needing those elements to be on the page. Doesn't matter. Okay. So now if I just take these Pokemon's items, we can insert them on the page. And what I'm going to do is, before I remove the item template, I'm going to do this. Items list. How can I grab the item template? Remember that we have not defined a custom attribute for it. We just have the reference to the component. But now I want to reference the list because I want to say, hey, in the list, I want to append the new items. I mean, why would you need to query something? Why would you need to identify something if you know that it's going to be the parent of something? In this case, item template, we can say parent element. Okay, TypeScript by default is going to think that maybe it's not there, but we know that it's there. So I'm just going to assume it with these exclamation. And it's just telling TypeScript, hey, I know that it's there. Okay, so now we have a reference to it. This items list, now, because it's the parent element, this means that it doesn't matter if we decided suddenly that we don't want to have this element, this item in here. Maybe we want to have it in the page wrapper. It's still fine. We're not breaking anything, because then all the clones, all the items are going to be populated in the parent, which is here. So it's gonna put them in there. Okay. So for I think it's just something cool that you can do, and you don't have to worry about querying it. Okay, so we have the items list, and then we remove it. Obviously, we cannot do it the other way around, because if we first remove it and then we check for the parent is no longer there, right? Because we've just removed it from the page. So we first have to get the reference to the parent, and then we can remove it. And now that we have the items list, let's just do the final thing, which would be items list dot append. And appending, you can either we could just take one, or we can just do this Pokemon items. And it's essentially it's the destructuring all the items and passing them in here. So if we do this and we check it, cool. Now we have all the items. Have Ditto, Pikachu, and Bulbasaur. Okay. Obviously, the picture is the same because I'm lazy and I didn't change it in here. But a list, now everything is populated. Now we're populating from the template. Yeah? Cool. Okay. There's just one more thing that I want to do before we wrap it up for today. Let's see what can we improve here. If we check this, and you see how first we can see the template, right? We can let me slow down the network. Slow down. We can see the template. Oh, too slow. We can see the template, and then when the JavaScript kicks in, then it removes the template, right? So this is not a good user experience, right? We don't want to have that. So what we could do instead is we could have the template hidden, right? The template could start hidden, and then we just show the elements that we append. But there's a problem. If I do this, now it means that I have to remember that the template was set to display flex, right? And then this means that when I'm doing the clones, I have to take the item and I could have to tell the item, hey, set it to display flex, etc. I really don't want to do that. It's not convenient. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom style. And I think I'll just do it here let's do it in the custom code section. This is for the entire project. And I'm going to create a style rule. And I'll define an attribute that whenever the attribute is applied to the element is going to be displayed none. So let me just call this, let's say, cloak. Okay. Usually the cloak naming it's pretty conventional. And now let's call this not cloak. Let's make it data cloak, just to keep with the convention. And in here, I'll say that display none. Cool. So we have this, and we can add it to the element. So we'll call this data cloak. And because we're just targeting the key, it doesn't matter what you write here. As long as you have data cloak, that's fine. But I'll just say data cloak equals to true. I don't know, because the cool thing is because the code, it's added to the global custom code. This custom CSS, it's not running, it's not visible here. If I did this instead, if I took this style and I added it in an embed on the page, I did this. Now this is pretty inconvenient because the element is hidden because it's being affected by the custom CSS. So I don't want to deal with this. I just want to see this custom display property whenever I check the live site. Okay. So obviously this is gonna cause a problem now, because now we can't see anything because the template has the attribute that it's preventing it to be displayed. But what we can do is, before appending the element, the new items, so when I'm creating the clone, I can say, okay, item, remove an attribute, and I'm going to remove the data cloak. So this means that before I'm appending the item, I'm just making sure that this attribute that it's setting it to display none, it's not present. And now we no longer can see the template. We can interact with it, but we no longer see it because the template had the attribute that it's setting it to display none, but the new items that I'm appending, though, do not have this attribute. And also, I don't have to worry about the display property. I don't have to remember, was it flags, was it block, was it grid, because we're just adding an attribute that it's forcing it to be display none. And once we remove it, that's it. We are falling back to the regular display property. Yeah, it is a really good tip. And it's definitely something that you have to use a lot in a Webflow application, because in Webflow, basically anything that you put on the page, it's going to be on the public site, right? So it's a way of avoiding content flashes. Okay, cool. So this is the end of the first session. I think that we've learned a lot today. We have not implemented a lot of things, but I think that I gave away a bunch of tips that would be useful if you're building web apps in Webflow. So next stream, we're going to take this and go on and implement more stuff. I think for the next stream, we can access template pages that show more information about the Pokemons. And then on further streams, we can create a game with this. So stay tuned, because the next streams are coming with more Pokemon app stuff. It's going to be fun, and you can learn a lot from them if you were not used to building web apps in Webflow. So thank you. If you like this, please leave a like or a comment, whatever. I will really appreciate it, and see you on the next Friday. Thank you.